Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Alison Mostwich, and I am the Director of Engagement at Efficiency Canada. I am joining you from Mokidstis, which is the Blackfoot word for Calgary, and that means elbow. So the area where the Elbow and Bow River meet in Calgary has long been an important gathering place to share stories, create community, and build futures amongst tribes. So I encourage you to learn a bit about Indigenous history in your area as well. For those of you joining us for the first time, Efficiency Canada hosts Discovery every 2 weeks. These sessions are meant to bring the sector and people interested in the sector together to learn. So we try to highlight research, findings from pilots, relevant topics, and innovations that we hear about. So before we get started, just a reminder to everybody that our presenter will take about 20 minutes to present, and then we'll have our Q&A session after, which will be moderated. You can use that question and answer box at the bottom of your screen to enter questions either as we're going or afterwards, and you can actually upvote questions as well. So the more likes a question gets, the more probability it has of being asked. So if you see something you really like, I encourage you to upvote it and I will ask it. So without further ado, I will invite our speaker today. So we have with us Klayton Gonçalves, who is the Senior Economist and Head of Business Intelligence with BuildForce Canada. This is the first time BuildForce has been with us, so we're so excited to host them. They just released a report called Building a Greener Future, which estimates the labor market implications for construction over the coming decade as we're transitioning to net zero and as we're transitioning away from fossil fueled heating. So Klayton, thank you so much for being here, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my slide here. So yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation and for that introduction. And I'm really excited to be here today to share some insights from our Building a Greener Future report, which is going to be publicly released by the end of this month on April 23rd. So for the past couple of years, BuildForce Canada has been working through our forecast modeling to estimate the number of additional construction workers that are going to be needed to meet the federal government's greenhouse gas emissions targets set in their 2030 emissions reduction plan. So our study here looks at three main activities from a buildings lens. And while we try to estimate the demands for both the residential and non-residential buildings, we did run into some data limitations on the non-residential side. So the additional demands that I'm presenting here today will be strictly focused on the residential buildings side of things, although we need to keep in mind that these demands will be much greater when we take into account the commercial, institutional, and industrial buildings across the country as well. So we're looking at three main activities. The first one being converting existing buildings away from fossil fuels and towards electric powered heating systems. And what we're talking about in terms of space heating, we're talking specifically converting towards cold climate air source heat pumps. And we're looking on the water heating side, converting fossil fuel powered units to electric units. We're also looking at a transition towards building new homes powered by these electric powered heating systems. And finally, we're looking at improving the energy efficiency of homes to limit the significant impacts on the electrical grid. So we looked at these three activities to estimate the number of additional workers that will be required over the next decade here. And as you can see here from the subtitle of my slide, it is a lot of workers. So we're looking at over 72,000, and that's only on the residential side. But just before I get into all of the details of our study, I wanted to introduce BuildForce Canada to those who are not familiar with the organization. So BuildForce was originally created over 20 years ago as the Construction Sector Council. And it was created to provide labor market information to the construction industry to assist in their workforce management. And being a publicly funded organization means that our report that is coming out and other labor market information is available through our website for free. What's unique about our forecast modeling is that we complement our mathematical models with input from the industry across the country. So we work with partners in what we call LMI committees. So we consult with folks that are close to the industry, both from government, from contractors, from training facilities, labor providers, and so on, to make sure that our forecasts resonate with the industry. So getting into our study here, so we start with the 2030 emissions reduction plan, which asks that we need to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030 from 2005 levels. So as buildings produce a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to be crucial that we address these types of emissions coming out of both residential as well as non-residential buildings. So we work backwards from this target in our system to estimate the number of equipment that is going to be required to be installed over the next 10 years. So this is under the assumption that we will reach those targets by 2030. How many additional heating equipment systems need to be installed, both on space heating as well as on the water heating side of things? And we're considering here retrofitting existing homes, which will mean some homeowners taking advantage of incentive programs to upgrade from inefficient electric baseboard heaters. But most of this is going to come through converting to heat pumps from fossil fuels and then converting to electric water heaters from fossil fuel powered water heaters. We're also looking at building greener homes, so both on the space heating and on the water heating, transitioning away from fossil fuels and building homes that will be powered by these electric systems. And this is going to be, it's anticipated to be a ramp up period over the next decade as changes to the building code progresses. And then in our system, we translate these additional equipment to be installed into investments. And from these investments, we're able to estimate the trade demands. And BuildForce Canada focuses on 34 different trades and occupations within the construction industry, which really they account for about 75% of the total industry. And these are what we call mainly the on-site trades, although we do also estimate the other occupations, which would be the auxiliary occupations within the industry. And finally, we're taking a look at making homes more efficient to reduce the impact on the electrical grid. So we're building in some additional renovation investments in our modeling here to fully understand the impact on the residential construction industry. To understand the conversion of homes across Canada, we started by looking at the Natural Resources Canada information on the number of homes in existence by their heating energy source. And on this slide here, we're looking at space heaters. So for Canada as a whole, we can see here that as of 2020, there were close to 16 million homes in existence, of which about 40% of these were heated by electrical sources, but most of this was electric baseboard heaters. Very few of these homes were powered by heat pumps. However, looking at the donut chart here on the middle of the screen here, we can see that about 45% of units were currently powered by natural gas, and this is the primary source of heating across Canada, although there are differences across provinces. So provinces like Quebec and the other Atlantic provinces are more heavily powered by electricity, while Ontario and the Prairies provinces, they rely more on natural gas. And then looking at the chart on the bottom here that shows the percentage of homes powered by electric systems, we can see here that there has been a conversion over the past 20 years, but the conversion has been fairly slow. So if we look back in 2000, about 31% of homes were powered by electric space heaters, and only about 3% of those were heat pumps. The remainder were other electric units, primarily electric baseboard heaters. And then if we fast forward to 2020, we see that has increased to 40%, with the percentage of heat pumps growing to 5%. But under this conversion, all homes in Canada, it would take us well beyond 2050 before we could convert all of these homes. So we are assuming in our modeling that this conversion rate will step up. This next slide here looks very similar to the previous, but now we're looking at space heaters here, or at water heaters. And it shows a very similar picture, although there is almost a 50-50% split between water heaters that are powered by electricity versus water heaters that are powered by fossil fuels across the country. Again, there does exist those differences across provinces, where Quebec and Atlantic provinces, and to a lesser degree as well, BC, are more powered by electric units, whereas Ontario and the prairies, they're primarily powered by natural gas and other fossil fuels. Just to give you an idea here, Quebec and New Brunswick, Newfoundland, all of those provinces, more than 95% of their water heaters that are currently installed are powered by electricity already. So based on those, we came up with estimates of space heaters that are required to be installed. And remembering here that we're working backwards from the federal government's 2030 emissions reduction plan. So these are the number of heat pumps that are required to be installed by 2032 to put us in line to achieve those 40% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Taking a closer look here at this chart, we're assuming that there will be a ramp up in the number of heat pumps being installed from around 200,000 units to 700,000 units by 2030. This ramp up is assumed to come through some homeowners choosing to replace their electric baseboard heaters based on incentives that are available. And that's given by the darker orange here in these bars. But the switch, and then it's also going to be based on the switch away from fossil fuels. So that's the slightly darker orange, which comprises a lot of the installations over the coming decade. And then finally, the very light orange here is the additional heat pump units needed to be installed in new homes. And as you can see, over the next couple of years, those numbers are fairly small. We assume them to ramp up in the late 2020s as changes to the building code could increase the number of homes being built with heat pumps. So overall, we're looking at about 4.9 million heat pumps anticipated to be installed by 2032 from these three different sources. Next, we can look at our estimates of water heaters, and we're looking at here at electric water heaters. And we also see a quite significant ramp up, especially as we start to build in those new homes being powered by electric water heaters. So we do see a ramp up here from about just over 150,000 units up to close to 700,000 by 2030. And overall, across the entire forecast period here, we're looking at installing 4.6 million electric water heaters. So this is quite significant in terms of the labor required for taking on all of this work, both on the conversion side and on the new home building side of things. And then finally, we also build in an assumption for a proportion of homes that will be taking on what we're calling energy efficiency retrofits, which are those retrofit or renovation projects aimed at making homes more efficient. So we're assuming that a small percentage of homes across the decade will be taking on some of those projects, and those range quite significantly in scope. They could be simple $20,000, $30,000 windows and door replacement, all the way to a full deep energy retrofit, which could range anywhere from $200,000 to $600,000 if we're re-insulating attics, re-insulating exterior and interior walls, as well as replacing the fuel type into the home. So based on these assumptions of the conversion of the heating systems, as well as building in these additional energy efficiency retrofits, we can take a look at what types of demands that creates for the residential construction industry. And right here, we're looking at the total direct new employment. So this is direct employment that will be generated in the residential sector to perform these three activities over the coming decade. So overall, we're looking at requiring an additional 72,400 workers in the residential construction industry. And that's taking both on-site trades as well as off-site occupations. So we're looking at increasing the number of engineers that work in construction, home inspectors, oil burning technicians, sales staff, and admin positions as well. And we break this out by fuel switching, which are those activities related to replacing the heating systems across homes versus the energy efficiency retrofits. And when we compare these two numbers, we see that the total number of employment requirements for energy efficiency retrofits is much higher than fuel switching, but fuel switching is concentrated among 4 or 5 different trades and occupations. So we're looking at 20,000 additional workers, but most of that is in these 5 trades that we have listed here on the left-hand side. So the heating and refrigeration and AC mechanics, they account for almost half of those. So we're looking at an increase in the need for refrigeration and AC mechanics of about 8,000 workers by 2032. So that's a significant increase. Looking at the current workforce for this trade across Canada, this would mean almost a 4 times increase. So we're looking at increase of 380% across the country. When we look at provinces like Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, that estimate is actually quite a lot higher, as there is more units required to be replaced in these provinces. And of course, the demands would be slightly less in provinces like Quebec, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, which are primarily already powered by electricity. So we're looking at significant demands across a small number of trades. So electricians, plumbers, we do see a need for gas fitters to do this work because these natural gas units also need to be removed. So gas lines might need to be taken out of homes. So we do see additional demands over the near term as we're converting these systems. On the energy efficiency retrofits, that follows more a pattern of a renovation project, although additional demands are going to be more acute for trades like insulators and installers of windows and doors, plasterers, drywallers, painters, as we're looking at re-insulating or changing windows and doors and that type of work, as well as, of course, we know that trade helpers, they play a key role in renovation projects. Taking a look at how these additional demands look like across the country. And now we're looking at only the 34 different trades and occupations that are primarily on site. As we can see here, the demands are, of course, more significant in large provinces where there is a lot of housing. So Ontario sees almost a 25,000 increase in the demands here. And then provinces where the primary heating source is fossil fuels, we also see significant demands there, like Alberta and Saskatchewan. In Quebec, we do see quite a lot of workers being required as well, and that's because of the size of the housing stock for this province. In the next few slides here, I just wanted to walk you through what the trade demands for the top trades are across the country, and being broken out by fuel switching for new homes, given by the burgundy bars, and fuel switching converting existing homes, given by the orange bars, and seeing the energy efficiency retrofits, give the yellow bars here. So even the size of these energy efficiency retrofit projects, ranging anywhere from $20,000 all the way up to 200, 400,000, we do see quite significant demands for trade helpers and laborers, as those demands are going to be quite significant here. But looking at in every province, even in Atlantic Canada, we do see the refrigeration and air conditioning mechanics pop up as one of the top trades being required, as well as electricians, because a lot of this work, especially in older homes, is requiring replacing electrical panels or upgrading electrical panels. We also see plumbers being required to install these hydronic systems, as well as sheet metal workers to refit existing systems into these new heat pumps. Looking at Ontario and Quebec here, Ontario being a province that is primarily powered by natural gas in terms of home heating systems, we do see refrigeration and AC mechanics popping up quite significantly there. So we're looking at significant demands for Ontario. And for trade helpers, those pop up as well here, given the level of energy efficiency retrofits that are anticipated in Ontario. Especially Ontario does have quite significant portion of its housing stock that is relatively older and would require bringing those units to better energy efficiency so that we don't overwhelm the electrical grid in the province. In Quebec, there is quite a lot of homes that are powered by electricity. So most of the demands here are driven by just energy efficiency retrofits, looking at making homes more efficient. But you still see your refrigeration and AC mechanics popping up there as one of the top trades that are going to be required in the province. And then just closing it out here with BC also being one of those provinces that are primarily powered by electricity, but we do see refrigeration and AC mechanics as well as electricians popping up there as one of the top trades. And for Saskatchewan and Alberta, which are primarily driven by natural gas, we do see quite significant demands for refrigeration and AC mechanics. And in fact, I just want to highlight that for Saskatchewan, the increase here in the number of AC mechanics represents about a 1,000% increase in the current workforce. So that is quite significant demands. Just to summarize here, this chart, there's a lot going on here, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of what residential employment could look like over the coming decade. So just breaking it down, this dark line that we see here across is what BuildForce was projecting without any type of energy efficiency as well as retrofits. So this was our previous forecast. And then we add in those fuel switching as well as energy efficiency retrofits, which brings this dark dotted line as the residential employment over the coming decade. So what we were previously projecting without any of this work going on was a decline in employment over the near term, giving those rises in interest rates, and then a recovery out to 2029 before slowing down, giving slowing population growth. In the new scenario, we see if this work goes ahead as planned, we could offset some of those declines in terms of rising interest rates over the near term. And then we see a quite significant rise over the coming decade, which would increase overall residential employment by close to 100,000 workers by 2032, which is quite significant. And just to wrap it up, at the same time, we're looking at significant demands to do this work. And this is already at the same time that the construction workforce is quite tight. And there is still a lot of work planned and underway, both on the retrofitting commercial and institutional buildings is going to be required as well. There is also the policy targeting building 5.8 million homes by 2030 to return residential markets to more affordable. And there is a ton of public infrastructure as well as major capital investments going on all across the country. So the construction industry must still be very focused on attracting and training and retaining qualified workers, as there will be a need to increase the share of traditionally underrepresented groups such as women, Indigenous people, as well as newcomers to Canada. Thank you.
Wow, that's a lot of information. So if anyone's interested, Klayton, what we can do is when this report goes live, we can send it to everybody that's in attendance today. We're happy to share that just as a follow-up. And we always record these sessions, so you can find this on Efficiency Canada's YouTube channel as well. I'm curious. So I had mentioned this is BuildForce's first time presenting on Discovery, and you typically don't work. This is your first labor report. Am I correct? I think you mentioned that to me. Talk about why now? Like, why was this important for BuildForce to do right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So on an annual basis, BuildForce Canada produces a labor market forecast for the construction industry, where we look at all sectors of the construction industry and try to estimate the demands as well as the supply needs for the industry. But this is a new study for us. So generally, we tend to look at the industry as what is most likely to happen. And those are the things that we build into our scenario. So for example, when we're looking at major projects, We try to only include major projects that have final investment decisions. We don't generally put in projects that are like pie in the sky. We try to create a forecast that is the likely scenario. But given these policies and targets set by the federal government, both on the housing affordability as well as on the greening of the economy, we thought it was very important to put out there a separate report. So this is separate from our annual forecast, but it is a separate report that estimates those demands. So should we proceed in this path, these are the additional workers that we're going to need. So it's a signal to all folks in the industry as well as in government that if we're going to achieve these targets, we do need to be thinking about the labor implications as well.
Absolutely. You work with a lot of the same organizations that we talk with on a regular basis, and this is probably one of, if not the biggest concern that they have right now. So just considering that, have you seen any solutions that you think are going to work well? Any examples that you can draw on?
So this is fairly new in terms of the retrofitting. So we're keeping a very close eye. But one of the things that we really want to emphasize, and you'll see this when our report comes out, is that as we move away from fossil fuels, there is a pool of labor out there, gas fitters, that in terms of building new homes, there will be less demand for those workers, but that does not mean that we can afford to lose those workers. So we definitely need to be thinking about how do we include these workers to help us transition away from fossil fuels and towards electric power systems. So that is definitely one of the things that we've been looking at. And BuildForce, we've been talking about this for many years now, that our demographics are stacked against us. We have an aging workforce. We're losing a lot of workers to retirement, and we need to keep thinking strategically about how do we recruit folks that have been traditionally underrepresented in the industry. And over the past year or so, there have been a number of programs that they do seem to be successful. So the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, for example, that is providing grants to employers for hiring first-year apprentices, seems to be pushing the needle in the right direction. As we track the labor force survey on a monthly basis, we've been seeing quite a lot of women joining the construction industry. And specifically, we're seeing women between the ages of 15 to 24. So we're looking at young women entering the workforce, the construction workforce. So those are all very good initiatives. And of course, more is necessary, especially in terms of onboarding newcomers. Some of our immigration policy is less favorable to the construction industry. And we do see that immigrants tend to be underrepresented in the construction workforce.
Indeed. It's interesting. It's a wicked problem. We talk about different demographics entering the workforce, even in relation to different sectors. We actually hosted a webinar a little while ago that was about creating more equity and diversity in your hiring and retention practices. If anybody's interested in that, that was for the electricity sector, but it is so applicable to so many sectors right now. It's just, creating a welcoming space and retaining a welcoming space for people, for all people. And yeah, I think that is absolutely needs to be a focus for employers as we move forward. I'm going to go to some of the questions that are in the question and answer box. So I would just remind everybody, go ahead and enter your questions there. Upvote things that you really like. We do have some questions that have been upvoted in there already. So I'm going to start with those questions. So this is a cool question. Do you foresee a tipping point for local governments or electrical utility providers in needing to upgrade their infrastructure? I think we all know that it needs to double or triple is what we're hearing, the electricity provision in Canada, but the tipping point question, I think, is an interesting nuance. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I know that there's the SNC-Lavalin report that estimated that we need to triple our electricity capacity, right? And that's one of the nuances in our report that we weren't fully able to take into consideration. Of course, on the non-residential side of things, as we're moving towards electric powered homes and buildings, and cars. Of course, our grid is going to need to be expanded, and that will create a lot of work on the non-residential side in terms of major projects. Right now, we've only included those major projects that have final investment decisions. So there is some nuclear work going on in Ontario. There is some major hydro going on in BC as well as in Quebec. In terms of a tipping point, I think I would need a crystal ball for that. So I'm not sure when that tipping point is, but hopefully we address those demands before we hit that tipping point where we don't have enough electricity. And I think this winter there was some scary news coming out of Alberta where they almost didn't have enough electricity for their cold winter this year. So
Yeah, I live there. I live in Calgary. So it was incredible. They put a call out and the electricity demand, they showed a graph, it almost immediately dropped. It was incredible. So demand response works. Okay. So I had a question about, I'm going to try to mix a couple questions here. So I had a question about when you're looking at the inputs, obviously this is a forecast and you're looking at inputs, and we're in this funny space right now where policy and incentive programs there's a lot of change. There's a lot of cancellations. There's a lot of announcements, and it happens in election cycles. We're used to that. So specifically, there's a question about greener homes, but also how do you account for that? I guess for just how much instability there is in that sort of incentive structure. And was that a big input into the report?
absolutely. I think without incentives, a lot of this work does not move ahead, especially on the energy efficiency side of things. I don't know many homeowners that are willing to just rip up their walls and re-insulate without incentives. Unless they're already doing a major renovation project, then they would already be considering those. So yeah, of course, the incentives are going to play a key role. There's been a lot of announcements about the Greener Homes program, and that was the main funding that led to quite a large increase in the number of heat pumps being installed in 2023. I can't speak to Natural Resources Canada about where that program is going. All I can say is that it definitely is required for this work to go ahead, but it doesn't impact our study because our study really stems from, it's a feasibility study, really. It stems from if we are to achieve these greenhouse gas emissions, this is the work required. Whether there is funding there to pay for the work, then that is the question that, yeah, definitely that work is definitely going to be stipulated by whether there is enough funding. Otherwise, we're going to keep on that consistent conversion rate that I showed at the beginning of my presentation, right? So where we're converting to heat pumps, but at a much slower pace.
Yeah. It's interesting because we have a question and kind of a bit of a statement in here about without intervention, how is this going to happen? But one intervention seems to be making the problem worse. And then there's some interventions that seem to be making the problem better. So when we see ESDC come out with incentives for training, and we see these incentives to keep people on longer and help pay for potentially wages, that's solving. So is it a bit of a chicken and an egg problem?
I think that our study is going to guide some policy. So we're economists, so I like to joke that we bring the problems so that the industry can come up with the solutions. So we tend not to prescribe solutions, but we definitely see that every time that we present this study, it's eye-opening that there is a lot of employment requirements to do this work. So definitely policies that help with training and expediting these workers into the workforce are going to be key. And then, of course, there's the policies around incentives and how that shapes the work as well.
Yeah, I think it can happen hand in hand. Okay, so we have a question here about the best data publicly available on tradespeople now. Do you have any suggestions about where people can find that data on where tradespeople are and if they need to switch? What were some of your best sources?
So our system looks at data from Statistics Canada. So we are consistently tracking things like apprenticeship rates. We track the labor force survey, and we track the census of the population. I think that's in terms of really granular information. That's the best we have. And unfortunately, it's only done every 5 years. But that is essentially our starting point is the 2021 census of the population. And then we run into things like place of residence versus place of work as well.
Mm,
So some data sets will be tracking where you live, whereas other data sets track where you work. So we do keep an eye on those and adjust our models regularly as we track those, as well as job vacancy rates. Job Bank does provide some data as well on the number of job postings across the construction industry, although most people that work in the construction industry do not get their jobs from a job posting. It's
mm.
usually recommended by a friend or a family kind of thing.
That's really interesting. What is your confidence level that industry can solve this problem? And how much of that needs to come from interventions?
That is a very tough question. And I think the simpler answer here is interventions are probably going to be necessary, especially when we're talking about how do we fund these projects. We're
Mhm.
going to need those types of intervention. And can you remind me the beginning of your question again?
Just your confidence level that industry can self-organize to solve.
Yeah.
I just
I,
know
I
we do a lot of work with HVAC and with HRAI, and it's a very segmented industry.
Yes, absolutely. It is. And then there's a lot of nuances between residential versus non-residential and so on and what are the training requirements for either. So, but I think the industry can definitely pull this together, in my opinion. Adding 100,000 workers over a 10-year period, it is a daunting task. No doubt about that. Coming from 2023, where we're already at a tight labor market, I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
not going to be without challenges, but
Mm.
there is things that can be done and some things that are already improving, such as those programs to bring in workers that are traditionally underrepresented.
Yeah.
And I think there's still room there to do more in terms of newcomers to Canada. Of course, we know that to increase our population, most of our population growth is coming from immigration. So if a percentage of those workers are able to help in terms of meeting these targets, that's going to be definitely crucial, as well as the industry has to be thinking about succession planning, right? We're well into the wave of baby boomers retiring, and
Mhm.
COVID probably accelerated some of those retirements as well. There was folks that were hanging in there, and then COVID happened, and they're like, you know what? I'm done. I'm dropping my tools. And some have come back, but a lot of them have not. So it's a challenging task to take on additional work, starting from a tight labor market and
Yeah,
knowing that you're going to be losing a significant portion to retirement as well.
absolutely. Unfortunately, we are up against the constraints of time right now. And I sincerely wish that all of the relationships that BuildForce has pushes solutions forward. I think when people get together and when there is such a significant and common problem, that helps people organize. And it seems BuildForce is in the right position to help convene those people and have those conversations and not just bring the problems, but bring the solutions too. So
We really
um,
hope that everybody will read our report and then act on those findings for sure.
yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue. I'm happy. I will share the report once it's out. I can just follow up with everybody that has attended this call. I'll send an email to you with the report. Klayton, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, are you comfortable sharing your email address, or should they just get a hold of BuildForce Canada? Because I think you've got some contact forms on your website. What's your preference?
Yeah, you can share my email with folks
Okay.
here.
Fantastic. There was a lot of really technical questions about the reports that I don't even understand enough to ask. So I'm just going to encourage those people to reach out to Klayton and we can chat about those. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so encouraged to see all the great chat as well. You couldn't see it, but people were sharing resources and solving problems, and it was really neat to see that. So I applaud everybody that was in the chat sharing resources and helping to solve problems, build case studies. Very cool to see. And thank you for being respectful in your language and in your contributions. So thank you so much, Klayton, for coming. We're getting lots of comments about great presentation. Thank you. So we really appreciate your time in bringing this information forward. As mentioned, this was recorded. It will be on YouTube in about a week's time. We've got a great session coming up next that we actually just secured. So it's not even on the website yet. So everybody's getting first peek at what it is. Clear Result's going to join us to talk about midstream programs. So what is a midstream program, you ask? That's a great reason to attend because I didn't know either. So they're going to talk about working directly with product distributors, incenting participants to shift their supply chain. So again, how are we meeting net zero? So I encourage you to join us in 2 weeks when Clear Results is going to be presenting that information, and keep checking back on the website. It will be posted soon. And with that, I will bid you adieu, wish you a happy Friday. And again, just thank Klayton for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody. Happy weekend. Bye.